If you've missed either of the previous two, they are on the website. Thank you, Steve. This one, the third one, will be on the website as well. So if you want to go back and take notes about all the heresies I say, you can go and do that. Today we're going to look at the general epistles, or sometimes called the Catholic epistles. Those are these: James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude. So, who wrote James? James? Traditionally, absolutely. The Apostle James, right? Who wrote 1st and 2nd Peter? Traditionally, the Apostle Peter. Well, this is a darn good question. Did he learn to speak Greek, right? Who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John? Traditionally, John, Apostle John. Who wrote Jude? Hey, Jude. Again, traditionally Jude, right? So the interesting thing about all of these, if you go with the traditional, idea of who wrote them, is all of these people would have lived at the same time Jesus did. They almost certainly knew Jesus. That's unlike Paul. Paul almost certainly never met Jesus. So that's something I kind of look for when I'm looking at these, is there any evidence that they would have known Jesus? My opinion, not so much. There's a lot of debate about these. There seems to be more debate about these than there is about the ones that are traditionally assigned to Paul. There are definitely people who are very much, for one or more of these, definitely these were the people who wrote them. But there's a lot of evidence that that's perhaps not the case. I think with Peter, it seems like the majority of scholars seem to think it was, in fact, Peter. Maybe there's a little division between 1 Peter and 2 Peter. Some people think 1 Peter was written by Peter, 2 Peter was a follower. There is definitely some similar content, so you can kind of think maybe it's the same person, but this stuff is hard, and there isn't really concrete evidence on this. Some scholars see a connection between especially 2 Peter and Jude. So there may in fact be some evidence to suggest that it was the same person who wrote both of those. But again, there's a lot of disagreement there. In terms of John, part of the problem is there's a lot of Johns floating around. So traditionally, it's the Apostle John, the son of Zebedee, but there is also somebody who is known by the John the Elder, which could also be the John here. Some people make a division between 1st John and 2nd and 3rd John, saying that 2nd and 3rd John are John the Elder. There are scholars who say all three of them have a very similar style, so it makes sense that all three are the same people. Early church leaders, we're talking 4th century, said it was John, the Apostle John. But of course, it sounds, like they were very near to the situation, but they're still 300 years away, 400 years away. So it's hard to put a lot of stock in that. In terms of Jude is also known as Judas, not that Judas. But you do sometimes see that. Now, Jude is supposedly the brother of James. And now, who is James supposedly the brother of? Jesus, exactly. So, by definition, that makes Jude a brother of Jesus, if you're following that question. But this is the question: did Jesus have siblings?
In the Lutheran Church, he did. In the Catholic Church, not so much.
Interesting that you say that, because I grew up in the Wisconsin Synod, And they were not so into the sibling thing. What I find fascinating about this is there is a continuum of ideas about this. So on the one hand, people say that Jesus literally had brothers and sisters. So, Mary and Joseph had additional kids. I've even heard some say they had additional kids before Jesus was born. I mean, there's lots of different ideas, but some people are very convinced that Mary and Joseph had further kids. Other people say step-siblings. So there's a tradition in some areas where people say that Joseph came into his relationship with Mary already with kids. So there could be step-siblings that are older than Jesus. Obviously, could be other connections there. Other people say, no, the way this word is used, it could easily mean cousins. So we might be talking a little bit further removed. The Bible does say brothers and sisters of Jesus. I mean, there are references there. But there's not a lot of detail, so it's hard to kind of really get down to it. Another interpretation is when they say brothers, they mean brothers in faith. So it could be just other believers who had a close relationship to. And that is, the words are certainly used in that way in other parts of the Bible, where it's clear they don't mean a biological brother. So it's a little tricky to kind of get down to brass tacks there. If we look at Matthew 12:50, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Okay, so that's very clearly showing a use of those words that is not intended to be biological. So we simply don't know. I don't know if anybody has any other comments about that, but this is one of those things that I think we get ourselves into danger if we think about it too literally. At the end of the day, I'm not sure it's that important, but it is interesting. So what I want to do is, we don't have time to go through them all, so I just picked out a couple that I think are interesting to me. So I wanted to look at James. Luther was not a fan of James. He talked about a few of the books of Bible as being second tier. And this is definitely one of them that he felt that way about.
Epistle of straw.
Exactly. He called it an epistle of straw. We'll get into a little bit why he might have thought that, perhaps. So James is written, the earliest versions that we have of it, it was quite accomplished Greek. The language was very, very fine. So it seems pretty hard to believe that somebody who, presumably grew up with Aramaic would have been able to master Greek at the level that it is there. Now, there is always this idea that we talked about last time about, was there a scribe? But even then, I think it's pretty challenging to imagine somebody talking in either their native language or in fairly simple Greek, and then having the scribe turn it into something beautiful. It's not impossible, but that is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't think it could be the actual James. Other people read James and they see some references to Peter, to the books Peter. And so if that's true, then that screws up the timeline. But again, people are writing about the same thing, so it's a little bit difficult to know which came first. Is this a reference to that, or is this an original idea that was then copied later on? So if we think that it was somebody else and not James, then there's always the question of, well, were they taking James' name in a good way or in a bad way? I think there's some evidence in James to think that maybe this wasn't quite as nice of a taking of the name as other ones, but lots of opinions on that too. So let's look at James 1 here. James, a servant of God, I'm sorry? Yeah, let me get the mic there just so we can get it on the. No, please. I appreciate the questions.
Well, James and Paul were rivals in one respect, weren't they? I mean, he was a true Jewish believer, and Paul was breaking the vessels.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I don't know that I have a lot of insight into that, but I mean, there certainly was tension in the church between the Jewish believers of Jewish heritage and the Gentiles, and so that was certainly a cause of stress within the wider church. Does anybody else have any ideas on that? But I mean, I don't doubt that there's something there to that. Yeah.
Luther thought James was about works, right?
Right.
And that's why he didn't like it.
Well, we'll get to that. Yeah.
And Paul, of course, is the progenitor of live by grace and faith. Right?
Absolutely. So sola fide, is it all about faith or is it about works? We'll talk about that because it gets a little complicated. Please.
Just a comment about Lloyd's remark. Yeah, there was some evidence in Paul's writings that there was quite a bit of tension between Paul and the Jerusalem disciples. Paul at one point referred to the Jerusalem disciples as the circumcision faction, right? Because at least some of the Jerusalem disciples insisted that you had to become Jewish before you could become Christian, right? That was the issue, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Well, and I think, we're still at a time where it wasn't completely obvious that there would be Christianity and Judaism. It wasn't clear how things were going to shake out, and it wasn't until, kind of later that those things divided very clearly. Certainly, some of the earliest Christians of Jewish descent used words that were commonly used in Judaism, like the tabernacle, those types of things. So from their perspective, those early ones kind of were feeling it was an evolution of their religion, not a new religion. And so that kind of complicates things and adds some stresses. But certainly one of the things in the epistles is trying to, at least some of the epistle writers were trying to make things a little bit calmer between the Gentiles and the Jews. Trying to create one body rather than two separate bodies that had a little bit of an overlap. Any other thoughts? All right. So James 1:1, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, greetings. Okay, so this is kind of getting what you're talking about. The 12 tribes, this really sounds like he's writing this specifically to the Christians of Jewish descent. Absolutely, yeah. It was just the purpose of this letter. I mean, you don't, if you're writing a letter to your sister, you don't write it to your uncle. You write it to your sister. It's just kind of how it goes. So James 1:2-4, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face various trials, consider it all joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance complete its work, so that you may be complete and whole, lacking in nothing. So a little bit of kind of suffering is good, right? One of the things I find interesting is, I would love to have data about how often Roman Catholics preach about James and how often Lutherans preach about Paul. Because there are these little elements here that if you have a Roman Catholic perspective, it just kind of feels a little bit more like your tradition, and the same for Romans. Some of that I think is a little misleading, and we'll talk to that, but that's kind of a gut feel there. If any of you is lacking in wisdom, ask God, who gives it all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given you. But ask in faith, never doubting, For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. So, the double, let's see. Well, I think I'm just going to keep going here. You must understand this, my beloved brothers and sisters. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. There's one of the greatest hits there. For human anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourself of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. Any thoughts so far? Keep plowing ahead here. But be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and on going away immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. Okay, so we're starting to kind of get into that faith, good works area here a little bit.
But the original cause was grace, the implant, right? And the God doing, right? And the growth from God's doing is now our lives through the present day.
Yep. Hold that thought. We'll get there.
That's mystical or what?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, let me give you the mic here. Oh, hang on, I'm sorry, I messed this up. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, forgive me if this is something that you're still getting to, but my understanding is that in Paul he says that there are the fruits of the Spirit. So I think that even if you don't start with works, through the grace come the works.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're definitely touching on where we're heading here. So keep holding it. No, but it's excellent thought. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Surely that faith cannot save, can it? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm, and eat your fill," and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, it has no works, is dead. Okay, so now we're starting to really get into it, right? So some people view this and Romans as in a direct contrast. We have on the one side faith, we have on the other side good works. And you have to kind of choose your lane, right? And in super, super simplistic terms, Roman Catholic is much more starting from the place of works, and Lutheran is starting much more from a place of faith. And so James often gets kind of held up as the Roman Catholic directive. Now, like I say, I've seen some people who I think really ought to know better, who are biblical scholars who kind of go down that road in a way that's a little unpleasant to me. I mean, I think the easiest explanation to kind of wrap your hands around, and it's been kind of hinted to here, is that Paul is talking about how you get salvation. It's about not about doing something to earn your way to salvation. It is about faith. I think James is much more talking to people who already are part of the believers. And they're saying, I see people out here, not here, sorry, don't mean to insinuate you. I see people out there who say that they have faith, but there's no way to be able to tell. The only way you can say that they have faith is because they tell you so. And so I think James is much more saying, well, if you really have faith, it ought to be visible somehow. You ought to want to do good works. So I think he's really writing at two different situations. Now, just to make things really complicated, one of the things that I like to do is try to figure out what kind of lens people would have been looking through at the time. And so it's really easy for us, given our history, to kind of look at, Germany in the 1400s and the 1500s, and there was this conflict between faith and good works, and it was really kind of a binary thing. To someone at this time, too, there was another idea that was just starting to get some credence, and that's Gnosticism. So Gnosticism basically said salvation doesn't come through faith, it doesn't come through good works, it comes through knowledge. So everyone is born with this hidden inner light, and that the key to salvation is getting the knowledge of being able to understand that inner light. And so a lot of people say that many of the aspects of James when he's talking about faith certainly is not pointing at Romans, at what Paul is writing, but is instead writing about kind of the early days of Gnosticism, and so is making it very clear that faith plays a role and good works play a role, as well as truth and knowledge. Yeah, I don't believe there's a direct connection. Do you know about that? Are they related, those words?
They're related, yes, but if you put the A in front of it,
Yeah.
turns it around. Yeah. I mean, the early Christians, by the larger Greco-Roman society, were considered agnostic because they didn't practice the Greco-Roman religions. And so they didn't accept those gods.
Right.
But gnosis is in both of them.
Right, right.
Is that what we call agnostics today?
Well, we use the word in every, an agnostic is somebody who just basically doesn't know. You're an atheist opposed to God, but if you're an agnostic, you're just not sure.
And I think it's important to separate that from Gnosticism, which really was a religion that started out around this time and became a pretty well-defined thing. Sorry? So again, they're connected, but I'm really speaking specifically about the Gnosticist religion. And this is where, again, the timing becomes kind of interesting, because if you say that it was James who wrote that, Gnosticism would have been very much in the earliest stages. So those ideas may have been floating around, but there wasn't a real true religion. But the later you go, then the more formalized it became.
So is Gnosticism kind of home in the Universalist church?
I don't think I know the answer to that. So Gnosticism as part of the Universalist church?
I know it's found a place in Harvard University. That was Harvard's big thing. Knowledge.
Well, yes. So if
If you look at a lot of New England mystics, you'll find the same thing. From the rock through New England, all over the place.
right. Okay, so that's a history I'm not that familiar with, but it sounds like academics were kind of rejecting faith, as we kind of understand it, because that wasn't scientific enough. Am I getting warm there? So if you kind of... Right. No, I get it. Yeah. No, and you certainly take like Thomas Jefferson, who basically wanted to view Jesus as a philosopher. and take away the spiritual aspect of it. Well, spiritual isn't quite the right word, but take away the faith part of it, and look at him as someone who, had philosophic ideas about how to live life and whatnot. He wrote his own version of the Bible that kind of stripped away a lot of the, yeah.
It's so funny because the fundamentalist Christians of today point to our founding fathers as being a prime example. They weren't even Christians.
Right. Yeah, so just to summarize, we're talking about how many of the founding fathers weren't really Christian as we understand it. They were deists, but not Christians. That's absolutely true. So I know nothing about this, but it sounds like, at least at various times, people who wish to go back to knowledge would have been attracted to Gnosticism because that was what their fundamental thing was built on. Yeah.
Said that God, like an alarm clock, the clock wound it up and let it go. God said goodbye, you're on your own.
Right. Yeah, so God wound up the alarm clock, then it was hands off, and it just ticked off on its own. Yeah. That's what Jefferson would have said. Yeah. Let's.
I do think we need to make some distinctions here, however. When we think about the contemporary issue with regard to knowledge, in the West, we went through the Enlightenment. And the turn to investigation, and ultimately the rise of modern science, and the whole worldview that goes with that. If you're speaking about ancient Gnosticism, I think, Paul, it's a little bit more diverse than just one thing.
For sure.
And the gnosis was revealed to awaken in us that spark of divinity. And it wasn't a kind of scientific sort of thing in our vocabulary. It was a mystical kind of thing, and we really only know about them by and large from the early, shall we say, Catholic form of Christianity that is writing against them. And so in many cases their writings were suppressed by the church, and we have to read through these writings to see what they might have thought. And that's always a dangerous business when somebody's writing against you.
Polemics. You talk about polemics.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Jim. We do need to. Gnosis is often translated knowledge, but science is a discovered knowledge. But gnosis in the ancient sense is a revealed knowledge, an internal awakened knowledge, which is completely different than a discovered knowledge. Yeah.
So, first, a quick question: did the writing of James precede the Gospels?
Almost certainly, yes.
James preceded the Gospels.
The writing of, not the events, but the writing of, yeah.
And the reason I asked that is it got me thinking. So if the gnosis were more of a revealing, as you said, Jesus said to Peter, "Come, walk on the water." And surely, I realize that's not scientific knowledge, right? Because science cannot explain that. But even so, it makes me wonder about faith, their faith. So the stories are going around. That's why I asked which book came first. So.
Well, and that's one of the really tricky things is depending on who you think wrote things, that messes up the order.
Paul, if you don't tell me to shut up,
No,
my
please
wife
go for
will.
it. Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
I think when we go back to the first century, there would have been Jews in the first century, not followers of Christ, who were influenced by Gnosticism earlier. In the 2nd century BCE into the 1st century, Gnosticism had taken root in Judaism. So the
Gnostic ideas.
Gnostic ideas.
Yeah.
There's a debate about when you have a full flowering of Gnosticism or streams that are floating around and ultimately. But I think there are many other divisions in this early Jesus community prior to the formation of Christianity as we come to know it. There are those, as Paul has talked about, who are Jewish followers. Paul is in an unusual situation from my perspective, because what we think about as justification by faith had its origin for Paul in a very specific context, and it had to do with how non-Jewish followers become part of the Jesus community. And his argument in Galatians, developed even further in Romans, is that they come in on the basis of faith and not obedience to Torah. In particular, 3 features of Jewish Torah: the sacred calendar, observing that, dietary regulations, and so on. And those are the parts of the Jewish Torah that most visibly separated Jews and Gentiles. And Paul was against that because it divided the body of Christ, which by definition for him was to be one. But when he develops his notions of righteousness by faith and so on and so forth, especially in Romans, but the church is divided. James probably was the head of the church in Jerusalem. And if we look back to this period as a kind of golden age of unity and harmony, it ain't there. It ain't there. And it never will be there, apparently, in 2,000 years or maybe going forward. So you can imagine, I think, there would be those who take from Paul a particular message. Works are not important. Faith is important. And there's the other side saying, hey, hold the phone a minute here. We need to read other parts of Galatians too, and so on and so forth. By the time you get to the 16th century, it's a different ballgame entirely,
right.
you know.
Yeah.
So
No, that's good. And I think it's important too to remember that Paul would have been looking for how do you become a part of the body of Christ because he wasn't born into it. So that was very much foremost on his mind, whereas James essentially was born in it, or people who are following, you know, they were born into the Judaic forerunner of what became Christianity. So he wasn't an outsider. So that changes your perspective. And again, who is James, or the author of James, writing to here? He's not writing to the Gentiles. He specifically is addressing it to the Jews. So I probably got out a little bit over my skis at introducing Gnosticism, all this kind of stuff. You know, there is a lot of details there, but I just find it interesting, you know, that it's real easy to break things down into this binary thing, but there was a lot of stuff going on. And we can't really understand until we start looking at all of these different things. I'm spending way too much time on this, but I do want to show one thing if I can here. This might be controversial. How do I get out of here? It is not escaping. There we go. So let's see if I can bring this up. So I want to show you ChatGTP.
The answer.
So like I say, oh no, did I spell it wrong? Did I do something wrong? Chat GPT.
It should think you can figure that out. It's so smart. It should be able to figure that out.
So, I want to acknowledge the environmental destruction. I mean, all of that stuff is completely, legitimate. And in a perfect world, things would be progressing differently than they are. But it's pretty cool in terms of looking at stuff in the Bible when you're not really sure where you're going or what's going on. So we'll just do something here. Does James talk about Gnosticism? So it doesn't mention Gnosticism by name, but many scholars think part of it is a pushback against ideas similar to early Gnostic thinking, and it gives lots of examples. Now, you don't have to go, take this for granted, that this is exactly the truth, angels are singing, this is perfection and all of this stuff. But it's a really interesting starting point when you have questions, just to see what ChatGPT comes up with. And I have to say, the answers are better than you would expect.
In light of Allison's sermon today about questions, now the word out there on the street is AI gives answers. Human beings ask questions.
Right.
And there's a relationship. Maybe AI will someday start asking the questions in a meaningful way too,
Right.
but we're not quite there yet.
Right.
So it's what you put into it and what you ask of it.
I mean, my recommendation is if you're cracking open the Bible and you're coming into something that you're just not making heads or tails of, throw it in there and see what it says. Like I say, don't take it for granted that it's giving you the perfect, Lutheran explanation for something. Although you can do that too. You can say, what is the Lutheran explanation for this? And it will give you an answer. It may not be perfect, but it'll give you an answer. So if you view it as a tool, not as the oracle, not as, it can really give you some interesting stuff. The other thing it can do is it can be a basis for when you want to talk about something, like what I'm doing today, where you say, okay, I have this hypothesis that I want to run by, hey, does Peter talk about, spending money in the church or whatever? Type that in and see what it comes up. And it'll give you individual verses that are in reference to what it is you're talking about. Now, you have to do the work to go look at those verses yourself and make sure you're on the same page and, get the context and all of that stuff. But it's really good at giving you a little bit of a shove. So this is one of those areas where I think it's a pretty cool tool. Well, I mean, Wikipedia can be pretty good as well. And one of the nice things about Wikipedia is that it cites its sources. It's very good at that. So when you see a statement in Wikipedia, usually there is a footnote. You can go down to the footnote, and then very often you can click on the footnote and go to the actual source that it's being cited and whatnot. That's right. Well, in ChatGPT, you can tailor. The more you tailor the question, the more the answer will be, Right. Now, one of the scary things about it is, when you type in, tell me about how Jesus talked about money in the Bible or whatever, it'll give you some nice answers and it'll be interesting to think about. And then at the bottom, it'll say, would you like me to write a sermon about this? Almost every time, if you do a religious search, it'll say on the bottom, would you like me to write a sermon about this? So if you ever think we're kind of going off the rails during a Sunday morning, maybe take out your phone and just see, are we getting a ChatGPT sermon? But anyway, I thought I should show this just because this has been helpful to me. I try not to depend on it for big ideas, but for helping point me in the right direction. And like sometimes the wording of something is just hard to get over. This is another way where it can give you, some explanation as to what's going on there. Yes.
I want to say something about, just from a personal point of view. Is that on?
It doesn't seem like it. No, I screwed it up. Sorry about that.
I well remember growing up, especially as a teenager, but probably before that, and often telling my mother that I had lots of doubts. And looking at these earlier verses in James about doubters, wow. But my Norwegian pious mother always said, doubts are good, Julie. Don't ever be afraid of doubts. And all through my life, I have had doubts. I don't feel like it's faith that is in some kind of a quantity that sits in me, and therefore I'm home free. I always wrestle with doubts. And so my dad sometimes would say, you're a Gnostic. And I knew that was not good. So, you can see how we put these words in boxes and turn them into something they probably never really were in context from early.
No, absolutely. I mean, in that particular case, I think I might have a few things on it coming up, but I don't think the doubts means what people thinks it means. Yeah, and that's always the big issue there. Yeah.
We humans love to put things in boxes.
Yes.
Especially other people.
Yeah, no, for sure that. Yeah. Any other thoughts here while I'm here? Okay, let's see if I can get back to James here without messing things up. Okay, there we go. Oh, that is not the right thing. Let's try this again. Okay. So more about faith. Let's move on here a little bit. But here is the passage that really gets cited a lot for just as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is also dead. But I think that's a better summary than what gets pulled out before there, So faith without works is dead. And, again, that idea that if you have faith, you'll just naturally want to do that. If you're not naturally doing that, then maybe there's a problem with the faith part. That's at least how I see that. Okay, let's just talk about doubts for, well, you know what, it's getting late, so I'm gonna move on to one more chapter here, 2 John. To the elder and to the elect lady and her children, the elder to the elect lady and her children. So the elder is the author. Now, who's to the elect lady and her children? Any thoughts on that? Virgin Mary. Oh, that's an interesting one. So I think we can safely say that elect in this case is people who are part of the church, the body of Christ. So elect in the faith. But there's a real disagreement in terms of what lady means there. There are definitely people who see this as literal. So this is a letter to a specific woman. But another way to look at this, and the way that kind of makes more sense to me, is that this is talking to a congregation, and that the children are the members of the congregation. whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father, Son, in truth and love. All right. I was overjoyed to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we have been commanded by the Father. But now, dear lady, I ask you, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but one we have had from the beginning. Let us love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard it from the beginning. You must walk in it. Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Be on your guard so that you do not lose what we have worked for, but may receive a full reward. Everyone who does not abide in the teaching of Christ, but goes beyond it, does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive and welcome this person into your house, for to welcome is to participate in the evil deeds of such a person. Although I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk with you face to face, so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister send you their greetings. All right, we just knocked out another book of the Bible. That's the entirety of 2 John. Any thoughts before we look at a couple little spots? So a couple of things just kind of caught my eye. One of the things, a lot of these tend to be, a lot of the Bible tends to be, watch out for those idolaters, those people who are having relations outside of marriage or something specific, these people who are doing wrong. But here the warning is everyone who does not abide in the teaching of Christ but goes beyond it. So again, you have to kind of think, what was happening at that moment to make them say that? So these were people, presumably, who would have been preaching the Word of God, but then preaching things that were not part of the Bible or the Scripture. And this is one of those where I really wish we had more detail as to what was going on. But it clearly must have had some meaning to the people who were receiving it. But this is one of the few instances that I know of where they're talking about not some bad tangible thing, but talking about something above and beyond what we teach. Yeah, Steve.
When I teach the book of Revelation, I always have one slide that's titled, "What You Know About the Book of Revelation That Isn't True." And one point is that Revelation talks about the Antichrist. Antichrist doesn't appear in the book of Revelation. It's from 1 John and 2 John, as you can see right here on your slide here.
Yeah.
Just to add to that.
Sure.
When we need to make a distinction between the context and character of authorship and the context of canonization, developing a book of the Bible and including it in the series of books. We have in the New Testament Johannine literature. We have the Gospel of John, the 3 Epistles of John, and the Revelation. And in the tradition, they come to sort of function together, even though I doubt that they were written by the same person or in similar contexts. Mary figures in this as well, because in the Gospel of John, she is at the foot of the cross, and there's a beloved disciple. We think that's John. You can go to Jerusalem today, and you can see in Jerusalem the Church of the Dormition, where by tradition Mary died. But you can also go to Western Asia Minor, not far from Ephesus, and you see the church of St. John, the tomb of Mary. And why is that? Because Patmos, the island where John received the revelation, is nearby. So they become associated with Western Asia Minor in the early church. Well, she couldn't have died in two different places, presumably, but the tradition develops that way.
Good stuff. I'm also kind of, let's go back here, amused by the way this ends. Although I have much to write you, I'd rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you, talk to you face to face. The children of your elect sister send their greetings. So this one, like some of Paul's stuff, we have this big long list of all these people to greet. And here it's like, figure it out. If we go to 3 John, it's a similar kind of thing here. I have much to write you, but I would rather not write you with pen and ink. This is not the same. This is the next book. Instead, I hope to see you soon, and we'll talk together face to face. Peace to you. The friends send you their greetings. Greet the friends there, each by name. So you figure out who the individual people are, and you tell them. I'm not going to bother listing them here. There's one other thing I wanted to show, and I'm going to go backwards just a minute to see if I could find it. So this is something I had meant to say when we were in James earlier. So do you notice the little passage markings there? And we get to 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 7, 8. Any idea why that is? So this is a translation thing. So let's look at the King James. So let's see if I can do this. So what I'm going to do here is go to BibleGateway.com, and we are going to go to, we'll just do 5 to 8. Let's see if that works. Okay, so here is the version that I wrote there. And now one of the really cool features of this is you can click on this button here. And now we can choose the version we want here, and we can go side by side. So in the King James Version, there are 2 distinct passages there. For let not that man think he shall receive anything of the Lord, period. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, period. So when they went back to do this, they realized that those are not 2 distinct thoughts at all. Whoops. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. So it changes that meaning completely. So I wanted to show you this just because I think this is a really neat feature that you can only do online, be able to compare multiple things. And you can go on, if you have a bigger screen, you can add 5 different translations and just compare them side by side. And kind of like ChatGPT, I use this to help me when I can't understand what's going on, because when you get different translations, you start to see how other people kind of felt about what was going on here, and it helps you make a little bit more of a thing. So I'm not ending in the most graceful way, but I don't want to start anything else with the time that we have. Yeah, have a little time for questions.
Following up on what Julie said, the book club next month is reading a book called Faith After Doubt. Is that it? And it goes into a lot of those, and our associate pastor, Colleen, is going to lead it.
Oh, great. What was the name of the author again? Brian McLaren. Oh, very good. Oh, great.
Anybody's welcome to come to that book group meeting.
Thank you. No, so, just to kind of sum up, I hope you enjoyed looking at the epistles in perhaps a slightly different way than you've done it before. One of the things I just love about them is, on one level, they're easy to read. They're written as letters, and it's easy to pick them up, and you can just kind of read through them very quickly. But you can go as deep as you want to go. If you start getting into the history and what was going on around there, there are so many levels to it. So I hope that you will pick up an epistle one of these days and take a look at it on your own and see what you can come up with. Maybe use Bible Gateway or ChatGPT to figure it out a little bit more. Use the mapping software that we looked at a little bit to kind of get a sense of where these things happened on the globe. And I just want to thank you for your attention and your interest. Any other last questions before I dismiss you? Sure.
Not a question, Paul.
Comment?
And thank you so much. This has been really delightful.
Thank you.
But I wanted to say about the notion that the Catholics always talk about works, and Lutherans know better than that. We only believe faith is a gift. And how dangerous it is when we make lines in the sand like that. And my own sense of envy of Catholic friends who grew up with such a sense of doing things and making signs and symbols and the riches that we threw out because we didn't want to be like the Catholics. Right. Amen.
I mean, something else I kind of think is interesting is it's not a Protestant Catholic thing necessarily. So like my kids went to William Walker, which is the elementary school down the way here a little bit, and it's very, very poor. The people who go there don't have a whole lot of money. I forget what the figure is, but back then I think it was like 85% were on free and reduced lunch, to kind of give you an idea. And one of the things they didn't really have was a PTA that could funnel in lots of extra money to do various things. And so I had found out, and I wish I could remember which one, but one of the neighboring churches had kind of adopted them in a way. And they would have a service day for William Walker. They'd go in and say, okay, what needs being done? We need to paint these walls. Okay, they'd go and paint these walls, buy the paint, all this kind of stuff. And so I kind of hitched my wagon to them a little bit to try to help out. And it was very interesting to hear the different mentality that they had. First of all, their day of service was on Sunday. So they skipped church to go work on the, and they told me that they did that because they believed that they were commanded to do good works in the community. And this was a Protestant church. Again, I don't remember which one, but so there really is that feeling in some of the Protestant denominations that works are definitely something to feature.
I used to go to a Quaker church, and we had a similar thing. It was, we called it Sunday morning service for service, and we would invite the homeless in and feed them a meal.
And it's wonderful stuff. I think the thing when we're looking just at what our faith tells us we should be doing, there's just that little different spin on it. And I feel, kind of along the lines you were saying, I think Lutherans can learn an awful lot from the Roman Catholics and these other Protestant denominations. And they can probably learn something from us too. There is a meeting in the middle somewhere.
I don't know. I think all of that I would agree with. I think it is important in a theological sense, not just in a sort of temporal, chronological sense. In our tradition, I think there is a priority for faith from which the good fruits of good deeds follow. We can get into a pickle if we turn that around, that somehow our good deeds are gonna. And while I say that, I think there is a sense in which faith grows out of practicing
Right.
at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think James is kind of talking about that. You know, James is saying that, you know, if we look at our faith and we can't see any good works coming out of it, it's an empty faith. That doesn't mean you needed to do the good works to earn the faith. He doesn't say that. And the other thing too is I think we often look, especially at Roman Catholics from afar, and assume that their standpoint is they do good works and therefore earn salvation. But I don't think a Roman Catholic would say that. You know. So we get stuck a little bit into what the situation was when Luther was doing all his writing and then apply it hundreds of years later. So, any other thoughts? It's about time to break up. Okay, if not, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Oh, and I should say next week then, Pastor Allison has been working with new members. It's been open to everybody. But I believe her intention is to have something that's a little bit more open for everyone. So hopefully you can attend that. I will be in Chicago, God willing. So thank you again.